Everybody, welcome to today's Link and Learn. As a courtesy to those of us who are here on time, it's 12 o'clock. We may as well get started. What do you think, Katie?
I think that sounds perfect.
Others may join us along the way, but let me first say thanks to Claire and Ben for hosting today's Link and Learn and sharing your expertise. Old Colony Law, I know you will tell us more about the firm as we get started, but just wanted to first say thank you for doing this for us. And also, as we always do, want to thank Florence Bank for creating these kinds of programs and making them available to our community, absolutely free and through the Chamber of Commerce. Florence Bank has been a great partner for the whole series, and we're just excited to bring you today's presentation. So with that, we should probably do a quick round to introduce ourselves. I am Vince Jackson, Executive Director of the Greater Northampton Chamber of Commerce. So Katie, I will hand it off to you.
I'm Katie McLaughlin. I am the Senior Manager of Investor and Community Relations at the Greater Northampton Chamber of Commerce.
And Jack, I'm going to do staff next, keeps with the staff theme. So you go next, please.
Sure thing. Jack Brown, I'm the Marketing Director here at the Chamber and also for the Hampshire County Regional Tourism Council.
And
Ben is next on my screen. Sorry.
Oh, okay, yeah. Ben Palkowski with Old Colony Law in Hadley.
Why don't you go next, Lindsay?
Hey everyone, Lindsay Levante. I manage Applied Mortgage in Northampton.
All right. Haley?
Haley Rebman, New York Life Financial Professional.
Tim?
Hi, I'm Tim Lovett. Oh, yeah, sounds so professional. I am the owner and operator of the Chucklin' Charlie Comedy Bus.
Now I was going to say, don't you dare make us laugh, but you made us smile. Thank you. And handed it off to Claire, who will continue with the baton from here.
All righty. Hi, everyone. I'm Claire Crowley. I'm an estate planning attorney and asset protection attorney here at Old Colony Law in Hadley. I'm licensed to practice law in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. At Old Colony Law, we work with a lot of business owners on estate planning and asset protection. And we're business owners ourselves, and of course, proud members of the Northampton Chamber of Commerce. And thank you everyone today for joining us for this Link and Learn. Thank you to Katie and our friends at the Northampton Chamber, Vince and Jack, for helping make Old Colony Law part of your Link and Learn series. And of course, for all the hard work you folks do on behalf of business owners and nonprofits in the greater Northampton area. And of course, thank you to Florence Bank for sponsoring this Link and Learn and for supporting our Western Massachusetts community and all the nonprofit work that you folks do. It's really great. And I'm here. I'm happy to be joined today by my partner in work and life, attorney CPA Ben Palkowski. Ben, would you like to say a few words as an intro?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. As Claire suggested, I'm Claire's partner, co-counsel, and partner in life as well. Little family business we have here, just like a lot of chamber members. I'm an attorney and a CPA, licensed in both professions here in Massachusetts. I focus my practice primarily on, kind of and meshes well with Claire, estate planning, and in particular, trust drafting, taxes, some transactional work. And as Claire alluded to, a good chunk of our clients are, small business owners. And we naturally, anytime a business owner, the core of our practice is really estate planning. But then, when we're working with business owners, your business is really an extension of your estate. And so, really at the end of the day, as estate planning attorneys, in a way, we're also business attorneys. To some degree, we're also tax attorneys, family attorneys. And so we like to stay in our lane, but we kind of touch on a lot of different areas, and in particular, business and corporate law here. So we're looking forward to this today. And look, given the small nature of the crowd, I think we'll try to dispense with kind of formalities, and we'll try to turn off our seminar mode and try to make this conversational. Maybe if there's questions, I think it's probably okay to speak up if you have your mics on, and then we'll try to catch them in stride. And if it's not timely, maybe we might defer them, but we'll try to get to everything, of course. But with that, I'll turn it back over to Claire to kind of just start the conversation on what is asset protection, like why are we all gathered here today when it's beautiful outside? We could be doing a number of other things. Why are we here talking about asset protection?
Don't remind us all of how beautiful it is outside. That's painful. But yeah, again, if you have questions or comments, feel free to just speak up or type them into the chat. Just to note that Ben and I have also created this handout. It's a packet of information for all of you as your takeaway for attending this Link and Learn. And hopefully you can use this as a reference, a reminder of the topics we discussed today. It's fill in the blank with some case studies and examples. And if you don't capture all the fill in the blanks, it's okay. There won't be a test at the end. Maybe we will test them. I don't know, Ben. We'll see. And again, questions, pop them into the chat. So let's get started. Let's talk about what the heck asset protection is. So asset protection means different things for different people. And as Ben alluded to, it's especially important for small business owners in today's world. It's all about protecting your family, your business, and essentially everything you've worked so hard to build and create, from the risks of lawsuits and taxes and government intrusion. And Ben, what would you say, how would you define asset protection from an old colony law perspective?
Yeah, in our office, we kind of, people naturally ask, what is asset protection? And, the working definition that we've come up with here is, asset protection is the process of using legal tools and making prudent decisions to protect yourself, your assets, and your business from loss due to lawsuits, creditors, bankruptcies, and disasters. Okay, at a high level, that's what we're talking about here. We're trying to protect ourselves, our family, our businesses, our stuff from known threats and unknown threats. Right? None of us have crystal balls here, especially in today's world. So we're in a large part we're protecting from the unknown. Okay.
Exactly. Yep. So that's a good idea, right? So we want to protect ourselves from lawsuits and taxes and the unknowns. Cool. So how do we do that? How do we do that as a small business owner? Well, let's talk about how we can create firewalls, right? We want to create firewalls that separate your assets from your business assets. We're creating a firewall to protect ourselves from lawsuits. So let's build that first firewall. So on page 2 of your handout, if you're following along, the first firewall is called activating the corporate shield. What does that mean? What does that mean to activate a corporate shield? It sounds kind of silly, but it's incredibly important. So activating a corporate shield is all about creating an entity for your business that prevents creditors from reaching your personal assets. So think about your personal assets, right? That's your home, your life savings, everything, really. So this is a very important first firewall. And there's many different types of entities, as I'm sure you all are familiar with. There's for-profit and nonprofit entities, there's public and private entities. And let's talk a little bit more about the different types of entities and why you need one for your business. So the LLC, right? We're all familiar, I think, with the LLC. Limited liability company is what that stands for, LLC. LLCs are typically what we often advise clients to form. They're easy to maintain, they provide flexibility for the business owner, and they're typically the most popular form of a business entity. And then you have, so 2 different flavors of LLCs, so to speak. You have a manager managed LLC or a member managed LLC. And we won't get into too much of the nuance there, but just know that there's 2 different types of LLCs. And Ben, do you want to introduce us to the corporations?
Yeah, and similarly, there's a couple different types of corporations out there. There are S corporations and C corporations. Those letters are reference to the subchapter of the tax code that basically in which they're created. The differences really depend on who's in the ownership, who the stockholders are, some tax tax related determinations there will dictate kind of which way you go. I mean, then separate from that, number 5 here, sole proprietorships and partnerships are actually not entities at all. And that's kind of what we're getting here. That's kind of the point here. So some businesses kind of operate without an entity. And, frankly, I think most are sole proprietorships or partnerships. And then the other flavor at a high level of entities are those that are within what we call a corporate shield, which are corporations and LLCs. When we talk about incorporation, that term often refers to both creating a corporation, but that it can be kind of confusing because that term incorporation often sometimes formally or informally refers to creating an LLC as well. So just don't get caught up too much in that terminology. So again, as we've been kind of beating the drum on, the purposes of the corporation is primarily to protect your personal assets from business creditors or suing customers. If you're at a medical office, you might be concerned about patients. If you're in any kind of professional service, right? Attorneys, accountants, engineers, architects, malpractice could be a major concern. I know someone here. You operate a comedy bus, so you're taking customers out on the road, potential liability there if you get into traffic accidents and such. Okay.
Crazy drivers out there.
Yes. A lot of slow speed accidents happen in the Pioneer Valley. Yeah, a lot of fender benders. So let's walk through an example to kind of crystallize what we're talking about here. Okay, so kind of in the halfway, 2/3 of the way down the page here. Nora Northampton opens an ice cream shop, Nora's Frozen Bananas, as a sole proprietorship on August 1st, 2025. She then forms an LLC, Nora's Frozen Bananas LLC, on September 1st, same year, so a month later. On October 1st, Hannah Hadley files a lawsuit against Nora Northampton and Nora's Frozen Bananas LLC for injuries she suffered after slipping and falling on a banana peel at the ice cream shop. Okay, so Hannah is suing both. You see what's happening here? It's very common practice in litigation, right? Hannah is suing both the business entity, right, and the business owner. So what her lawyers are trying to do is pierce through that corporation to attack Nora's personal assets. And so the question we pose here is, does the LLC protect Nora's personal assets from the suing customer? So what do folks think here?
Yes.
So, I think we need more information, right? It's kind of a trick question here, actually, full disclosure. So the business was opened in August, right? LLC formed in September. The lawsuit was filed in October. So the question is, when did the slip actually happen, right? And so I think the outcome would depend on when that slip happened relative to when the LLC was created, right? So I think that if Hannah Hadley slipped on the banana, say on August 31st, before this business was in an LLC, I think Nora could be exposed here for liability purposes. But potentially, if the slip happened after the entity was created, on September 1st, 2nd, it would be there to provide the protection. And so, I think the takeaway here is, think about the nature of your business. You can always kind of get started before you get the formalities in place, but just know that, if you're kind of taking customers out on the road before you have that corporate shield set up, or if you're entering into contracts, right, you personally could be on the hook as the business owner rather than have that liability protection through the entity that frankly is not in existence when you get into such agreements. So the timing is everything here. Is that would be the takeaway. Other purposes of incorporation, folks, there's tax planning opportunities. So the type of entity that you create, obviously the asset protection, that's the topic du jour today, but other factors will go into that decision, including, again, are you with business partners? Are you on your own? Where are you operating? The nature of your industry, and as well as tax planning, opportunities. And then, sometimes, corporations are made, it's just kind of, there's a perception that there is credibility and legitimacy that if you're corporated, there's a perception out there to some that, you're less fly by night, right? You're going through the effort to get your business registered. You're kind of getting out there more publicly. You're not just kind of Joe Schmo. It kind of conveys a sense of, legitimacy, if you will. Not really a legal, reason for, it's more vanity really, but, it kind of comes up and people ask about it. So. Okay.
Yeah, so just to jump in there, that's a good point, Ben. So, yeah, it does establish legitimacy, right? When you have a business entity. So let's walk through this, right? So I chose my business entity. I have formed my business entity. I'm operating my business, so I'm all protected, right? I don't have to worry about anything. Is that how that works?
No.
No. And why?
Yes. So it doesn't just automatic. So you file, basically you establish your organization, right? And, you have some documents, you go see your lawyer, maybe you go online, you print out some documents, you put them in a binder, put them on a shelf, and you think you're all good. But that's where people tend to get in trouble. So we're going to walk through a couple case studies, right? We're going to talk through the notion of piercing the corporate veil, right? We're establishing our business entities to create what we call a corporate veil, a corporate shield, right? And so when people sue, right, over the years, as people have sued businesses, court cases have basically defined kind of the parameters of protection that businesses are provided. Now, there's some consistency throughout the states. Sometimes states depart from one another. It's very, very fact specific and case intent and state specific here. But we're going to walk through some Massachusetts cases. So we're not going to go into that. We're not going to bore you with like kind of case law here. This isn't law school here. We won't put you through that. We went through that, so you don't have to, I guess. So
You're welcome.
right. But this case study, my bread baking company versus Cumberland Farms, issue here. So
Cumberland Farms.
So bread company had an agreement with kind of the corporate farms kind of corporate structure to have their bread kind of out for sale. And the issue here was the kind of corporate the corporate structure of Cumberland Farms. There was the main entity, and they had kind of regional offices, and some stores were kind of standalone entities. And so basically, the bread company sued Cumberland Farms and kind of their ancillary businesses, if you will, basically out of a dispute regarding, the placement, I think it was, of their bread and the bread racks that they kind of wheeled into the store to sell them off of. And so basically the takeaway of this case, the court determined that the takeaway from this case is twofold. One is the notion of the corporate shield. We've been talking about it in the context of business owner and then the shield protecting from the business, right? Having a shield between the business owner and then the business. But that same concept applies when we're talking about business to business. So, for example, if a parent corporation owns a subsidiary corporation, and parent wants to be shielded from the liability of the child corporation, if you will, the same, we still need to, the parent corporation still needs to make sure that they're following the corporate formalities to make sure their shield is protected, from the other businesses, not just the other individuals' assets. And so this case study, basically, the takeaway is that, the same concept applies, in terms of creating a firewall of business to business, but as well, the chief takeaway here is that the fact that Cumberland Farms wasn't necessarily intending to engage in any kind of fraudulent activity, they weren't intending to do anything nefarious here. What the court basically said was that, when there is a confused intermingling of activity, that's really the question. Like, you put yourself in the consumer's shoes from their perspective, right? Are they going to be able to tell, kind of whose store am I in? Who am I transacting business with? Is it Jane Doe, or is it Jane Doe Inc.? Or is it Jane Doe Sister Inc., right? You need to put yourself in the shoes of the consumer, make sure that's clear, okay? And if it's not clear, if we're talking about Jane Doe or Jane Doe Corp., well, then Jane Doe herself could be exposed because of that ambiguity. Now, building on to this case, a couple decades later, right? We have this other case here, Pepsi Cola versus Checkers Inc. basically the takeaway from this case is that, okay, the courts, throughout the country have been trying to wrestle with kind of this, piercing the corporate veil, the legal doctrine on this. And so over time, Massachusetts adopted what of other states have adopted, and that is a 12-factor test. Okay. We won't need to go into all the factors, but we've highlighted them here out of this excerpt of this case. But, basically we're looking at, non-observance of corporate formalities, insufficient capitalization, use of the corporation for transactions of the shareholders. And so, the essence of what they're getting at, folks, is, are we indeed distinguishing the business entity from the person, right? Are we distinguishing corporation A from corporation B? Are we distinguishing LLC A from member of LLC B and member of LLC C, right? Are we being clear as to who the consumer is doing business with? And then these factors will kind of dictate this, right? And the essence you can see is basically, are you following these corporate formalities? Can the business entity stand on its own 2 feet? Is there money in the checking account, right? Is it filing tax returns, et cetera, okay? And then finally, this last case study here, folks, to kind of really emphasize an important point is, even though there's 12 factors here that the courts will often look to see if business owners are honoring their corporate formalities and therefore deserve the protection of the corporate shield, what a later case in the early 90s made clear was, look, in this particular case, they said 4 indicators pointed in favor of piercing the corporate veil, 8 against. But the exercise is, of course, not one in counting, okay? So you can't just sit there and say, well, I'm good. I'm 11-1 here. I don't care if I, didn't file my taxes or I'm not in good standing with the Secretary of State, because, it's not a scorekeeping exercise. Basically, by not following one formality, if it's so egregious, just one could be fatal to having that protection of the corporate shield. So, no, we went through that kind of quick here, but I think I'll punt it back to Claire. I think Claire's going to go through some takeaways here. So depending on the type of corporate or LLC entity, folks, that you have, Claire is going to run through kind of some of the items that you're going to want to have on your radar and that you're attending to, in the course of operating your business.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Ben. So how do you maintain your corporate shield, right? So you can kind of use this handout as a bit of a checklist that you can reference. So you want to hold regular meetings. You want to maintain a business record book. Like Ben said earlier, get out your binder, right? You want to maintain an up-to-date business record book that includes multiple things. And here's where our checklist is. So we want our certificate of organization in there, our bylaws, annual report, director shareholder meeting minutes are important, stock certificates, transaction documents related to finances, director. Ben, do you have the key for G?
But, oh yeah, thank you. Yes, the answer key. The conflict of interest policy.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Conflict of interest policy. Yep. So you add that to your binder as well. And you're also going to be filing annual reports with our friends over at the Secretary of the Commonwealth. You're going to document your contracts and other major transactions, file timely taxes, and regular accountant review of your books and ledgers. And those are all things, that you can do to really try to maintain that corporate shield. Again, the big takeaway from this first firewall, right, is building that firewall between you and your business, choosing the right business entity, and maintaining that business entity so that the courts don't say, this was a sham. The courts can't reach through and grab your personal assets for creditors. All right. Anything else to add to that section, Ben?
Yeah, we could literally spend all afternoon on this, but we won't. I think there's a good high level overview there. The decision making on this, folks, is going to be very specific to kind of where and what you do for business and who you do it with and all that stuff.
Yeah, of course. So we've built that first firewall. We're maintaining our business entity, and let's move on. Let's build that second firewall. All right, so let's keep going. Let's make our wall stronger to protect our assets. How can we do that? Creative estate planning. So this is fun. We're getting to the fun stuff now. Creative estate planning. Estate planning is about more than just having a will. There's a lot that you need to plan for. Now, we know everyone in this room, well, this virtual room, needs a will, a power of attorney, and a healthcare proxy. However, as a business owner, you will probably need more than that. Sometimes those documents you get online are not comprehensive enough. Simple foundational online documents aren't typically enough for small business owners. Now, estate planning provides you with there's a million different reasons really why you should engage in estate planning, but we've highlighted some main ones here. So you get to control the distribution of your assets upon your death. You can manage the inheritance for your loved ones. So maybe you have kids, grandkids. Estate planning provides you with a vehicle in order to manage that inheritance. Provides you with estate tax planning, right? Nobody wants to pay more in taxes than they have to. I've never met anyone, at least, that wants to pay more in taxes than they have to. Estate planning, of course, it talks about, it dictates what happens to your assets after you die, but it's also important during lifetime, right? Especially for business owners, right? So now we're talking about incapacity planning. Who's going to run your business if you're not able to do that, right? Who's going to make payroll? Who's going to pay the rent if you're not able to do so due to an illness or an accident? Unfortunately, those things happen, and we need to be prepared. And creative estate planning, of course, provides asset protection. So again, estate planning you can get really creative with it with small business owners, as we'll get into in a little bit. And so let's move into trust. Ben, do you want to take us through the trust section?
Sure thing. Yeah, just to piggyback what Claire was saying, just kind of a high level on estate planning. I mean, as a business owner, it's interesting because when we talk about estate tax planning, number 3 here, this is what really comes up quite a bit for a lot of businesses, especially those that are kind of maturing or have matured and have been in existence for some time, because the valuation of your business is includable for tax purposes at your estate.
Yeah.
And the tax regulators can get, they can get pretty aggressive when it comes to the valuation of your business. They'll say, oh, well, upon your death, your business is worth, $3 million, but in reality, you and your family, you think it's worth a few $100,000, right? And so part of estate planning, there's some techniques we can deploy to basically decrease the value of your estate so that, basically you don't get in a situation where maybe if you're passing on your business to family, children, spouse, whomever, right, they're not in a position where they need to pay a tax bill, but they need to sell off half or a portion of the business just to pay the tax bill because of the valuation of the business itself. So big trap that you can get into. And that also speaks to succession planning. And that's a big part about estate planning. Is the business going to terminate upon your death? Do you want to pass it on to family? Do you have an agreement with partners? Is your estate plan in sync with the business documents? Because if not, that could be a conflict down the road too. A lot of things to think about. Okay, so with regard to trust, right? A lot of business owners will need a trust of some sort. Not everyone, but as part of their estate plan, and not everyone, but it makes things a lot easier in terms of succession planning and management during life, as Claire alluded to. But oftentimes, people will call our office and say, hey, I need a trust. I need to put my house in a trust, my business in a trust, right? And then, naturally, we really need to kind of sit down with folks and kind of get out, okay, what are we getting at here? What are your goals here? Because different trusts do different things. Regardless of the complexity of a trust or how big it is, or how many parties are involved, there's really like kind of four fundamental things that every trust has. You know, I think a lot of us have heard of trusts. We're kind of loosely familiar with them, but you know, it's kind of cryptic to people. Like, what are these things, right? They're not really entities, right? But what are these things? Basically, a trust is a legal arrangement for property ownership. Okay, and so there's four things involved in a trust. You know, every trust, right? There's the property, right? That's in the trust. So usually it's real estate. Maybe we're talking about brokerage accounts like investments and such. You put personal property there. You put anything. You put a water bottle in a trust. You can put a house in a trust, right? Any property. And then there's what's called a grantor. Okay, that's the person making the trust. They're granting, if you will, property into the trust. Then there's trustee, right? That's the individual or the entity that has what's called legal title. They're the ones where you're basically the grantor is making the trust, right? And they're providing the trustee with the rules of the road. These are the permissions you have, trustee. This is what we want you to do. And finally, there's what's called the beneficiary. That's the individual or individuals that have what's called equitable title. They're the ones who are benefiting, right? You know, from the trust. So going through this example here, Nora Northampton has a minor child, Gary Granby. She establishes a trust, naming herself as trustee. Okay, so you can play dual roles here. It's very common where, you know, I, Ben Palkowski, will make the trust, but I'm going to say I'm the trustee, right? I'm making a trust. I'm calling the shots until my death, right? Then someone else will be trustee, but ultimately maybe I'm thinking about Claire or our children or our cat, right, as ultimate beneficiaries. So in the example here, we have Nora Northampton has a minor child, Gary Granby, established a trust, naming herself as trustee. The terms of the trust provide that Nora is a trustee and has full access to trust assets during her lifetime. Upon Nora's death, Nora's sister, Hannah Hadley, will be trustee to manage trust assets of Gary's then under age 30 years old. So what we're saying here is that Nora, she's setting up a trust to manage her assets. She's planning on, okay, upon my death, I want to make sure that, you know, my son Gary's taken care of. But if I happen to pass while Gary's still young, I want my sister, Gary's aunt, to come in and help out. And oddly enough, folks, I know Hannah Hadley also happens to be the one who sued Nora Northampton after falling on the banana peel. So I think, you know, naturally in this stuff, you know, there are some, you know, kind of family dynamics you have to contend with. So there we go. That's neither here nor there now. But
We have some family drama here at our
right.
Link&Learn, yeah.
But you see the point here, folks. So the takeaway here is that what you're doing is you're setting up a trust, you're setting up the succession planning. I'm the beneficiary during my lifetime. Upon my death, I'm naming other beneficiaries, but you're setting all this in motion, giving it full, you know, kind of legal effect here. So why would we set up one of these trusts, right? Why are we doing this? There's a lot of different reasons. One is, I think Claire alluded to, big one for business owners. This is why we keep emphasizing this. Asset management in the event of incapacity. If you're one of those businesses where you're the chief cook and bottle washer, and you are temporarily incapacitated because of a traffic accident, or maybe you're losing capacity because of another health condition, right? We're gonna need to plan for that. Does your spouse know what the heck, you know, your passwords are, what to do, right? Do your employees know? You could see how a business can run to a screeching halt in you know, such a scenario, right? Managing inheritances for financially unsophisticated beneficiary, and that's not an insult to anyone. But, you know, most people are not. I don't know. You know, most people lack, you know, financial sophistication to, you know, to some degree. Not all of us are financial advisors or accountants or attorneys, and that's why we're here to help. Oftentimes, it's the case where, you know, in a marriage, one spouse dies, but the spouse who dies first kind of controlled the checkbook and controlled the finances, knew all about the taxes, and the other one, you know, the surviving spouse is kind of left hanging there to some degree. With some planning, you can make sure that your spouse, who maybe is not as financially sophisticated as you, is teed up to succeed with the right professionals and with the right planning. Okay. we talked about reducing value of your estate, right? So there's some, basically you could set up trust as a technique to basically manage assets out of your estate, okay? For the purposes of basically playing the tax game, if you will. Ensuring disposition to specific beneficiaries. So beneficiaries, you want to leave, whether it's a business interest or your property, children, family members, charity, always good to have backup planning. Sometimes we ask our clients, you want, you want business assets to go to your children upon death. What if they don't want the business? What if they predecease you? Okay, well, we'll make some contingency plans. We'll sometimes we'll ask, our clients, are you, if we get the feeling that they're charitably inclined, we'll talk about different opportunities to leave to charity as part of their estate plan in a tax efficient way too, right? And we'll evaluate whether it makes sense to donate to charities now or wait until after death. Where do you get the biggest bang for your buck from a tax perspective? Asset protection for future generations, of course. I want to leave my inheritance, right? I want to leave inheritance for my children, but I'm worried about one of my children's, spouses, right? I think that their spouse might be just kind of hanging on until I pass, just to grab the inheritance. That's a real concern people have, and something that we can, really have a real legal solution for. And of course, avoiding the time and expenses of probate. Good Lord, a lot of us have probably been involved or heard of stories about just probate delays. A loved one has passed and you can't get title to the very house you're sleeping in, right? You can't get your access to a bank account that your name is all over, right? You can imagine what can happen when a business interest gets held up in probate. That can be an absolute absolute nightmare.
Mhm.
Talking a little bit more about the asset protection trust idea, okay? So this happens quite a bit. And this, I want to put us for a moment here. I want to talk about this in the context of I'm a parent, okay? And my child is a business owner, okay? I want to leave my child his or her inheritance, but my child is a dentist, okay? I'm not picking on dentists, this is a profession that came to mind. I don't want my child's inheritance to get in the hands of a suing patient potentially, right? And so one planning technique you can deploy is basically you can leave your child's inheritance in an asset protection trust. And how you can do this is you do this in a way where you want to make sure that you have what's called an independent trustee. This is a kind of a trust where you don't want a family member, right? You don't want maybe your child himself or herself or their sibling to be the trustee. You want someone independent, usually like an attorney or a financial professional. Some banks have trust departments. I know there's a couple locally that do. But the idea here is that you're giving someone who's independent broad discretion to make distributions or not make distributions, right? So the independent trustee has broad discretion, okay? Accordingly, right, there's no way for my child to compel a distribution, right? Because I'm saying independent trustee has full discretion to make distributions. So that means my child can't say, hey, trustee, pay up, okay? They can't compel a distribution, okay? Because the beneficiary cannot him or herself compel the distribution, neither can the beneficiary's creditors, right? The creditors cannot reach what the beneficiary themselves cannot reach, right? And so that's how we're kind of protecting our children's inheritances here, okay? So just walk through an example here. Nora Northampton's adult child, Earl Easthampton, owns an HVAC installation and repair business. Nora is concerned that sometime in the future, a customer may sue Earl and come after Earl's inheritance after Nora is gone. Nora establishes an asset protection trust under her estate plan to protect Earl's inheritance. And so, again, what this would look like is upon, when we're drafting this kind of estate plan, we'll say, okay, upon my death, I leave Earl's shares inheritance in trust, distributions in the sole, absolute, and uncontrolled discretion of the independent trustee, okay? And then what we also do is we have on the side, we have a memorandum of intentions to provide instructions, okay? So we're making a clear legal standard in the estate planning document that says trustee has full discretion. But then kind of behind the scenes, we're saying in a memo, hey, Earl should have full use and enjoyment of his inheritance. And, we want him to be able to get a distribution whenever he wants. But I'm worried about a potential plaintiff because of his business. And that's why that's why we have this trust. And so the trustee can manage things accordingly. This is to make clear that this is not the kind of trust where we're worried about Earl maybe, spending it, his inheritance at MGM or substance abuse habits, which frankly we see from time to time. This is an issue where we're trying to protect Earl from outside forces, and so in this way we're kind of having full protection for Earl, but also baking in some flexibility at the same time. Sometimes what we say is this is an area where with planning it's really good because we can kind of have our cake and eat it too, have the protection, but also not be overly rigid to the point where you don't have that flexibility. Okay. Time check. How are we doing on time, Claire?
We're doing great.
Okay, I'll just walk through the life insurance piece, and then we'll take a break from trust here. You folks are going to know more about trust than like most lawyers do. Like when we're done with this, it's good. So, life insurance trust. So, big thing here because life insurance comes up a lot for for business owners, right? I alluded to this earlier. The valuation of a business, right? Your business interest is includable in your taxable estate for estate tax purposes, and sometimes those valuations can be surprising, frankly. So one thing we do is sometimes depending on the situation, we'll advise business owners to get insurance policies, right? As part of your business plan. Maybe the business owners have insurance on each other, right? So that they can buy out each other's interest upon a partner's death, making sure that there's not external parties all of a sudden getting their nose under the business tent. Okay. So anyway, a big thing with life insurance here, the big takeaway here is that you may have heard that and I'm not picking on Haley here, but you may have heard that claims that life insurance is tax-free, but it's actually kind of a misnomer, right? Life insurance is indeed income tax-free, but it is not estate tax-free. So this is what's surprising to people because you're paying $100 a month or whatever for your policy or whatever your arrangement is, and the policy has a $500,000 of coverage, right? And you're providing that kind of liquidity in your estate for your loved ones upon your death. But that $500,000 is includable in your estate, just like the home equity, right, that you have in your home, just like your retirement account is includable. And so in Massachusetts, there's a $2 million estate tax exemption. So that means once you have $2 million in assets, right, then your estate is in essentially taxable territory. So you could see how even people who don't consider themselves to be particularly wealthy, you can see that if someone has a modest 401k, a modest house, and a life insurance policy, you can get up to that $2 million mark pretty quickly. And that really does indeed surprise people because when we hear about the estate tax, we're often thinking about, oh, this is like the billionaire, just the ultra wealthy. But here in Massachusetts, there is indeed a quite punitive estate tax that does indeed hit middle class families. And so we can plan accordingly to some degree with a life insurance trust. What we do is instead of Ben Palkowski owning my life insurance policy, the Ben Palkowski irrevocable life insurance does. The trust is outside my estate, so therefore the terms of the trust state that upon my death, life insurance pays out into the trust. It's outside of my estate, and we just take those life insurance proceeds completely off the table in terms of the tax authorities. Great little tool there. Definitely underutilized in middle class families, especially folks with a sizable coverage. Moving right along, I'm going to punt this back to Claire to wrap up. To begin wrapping up anyway, asset allocation on the next page.
Great, yeah, thank you. So we've talked about estate planning, the purposes of it. We've talked about a trust. What is a trust? Why do I need a trust? A couple different types of trusts we've talked about. So let's talk about asset protection, or asset allocation. So when one spouse is a business owner and one spouse is not a business owner, this provides us with a huge opportunity to engage in asset protection planning without even needing to draft a trust, right? So asset allocation is the division of a married couple's assets. Now, why would you want to divide a married couple's assets? Well, for estate tax purposes and for asset protection purposes. So let's go to that example and then we can chat a little bit about what asset allocation looks like through a real life example. Well, a real life fake example here. So we have Nora in Northampton. Nora in Northampton works at the local Chamber of Commerce, and her spouse, Amanda Amherst, owns a beauty salon. So we have the business owner's spouse and the non-business owner's spouse. Their assets include Nora's 401k, valued at $500,000, a joint investment account valued at $500,000. Their home is owned jointly, and there's no mortgage, and their home is also valued at $500,000. We have Amanda's business, valued, of course, at $500,000. And each Nora and Amanda have life insurance policies on each other with $500,000 worth of coverage. So they apparently, this couple really likes $500,000. So how should Nora and Amanda divide their assets to maximize their asset protection, right? So this is all about looking at who's the business owner, who's not the business owner, and trying to title assets accordingly. So for this example, because Nora is not the business owner, it might make sense here to title the joint investment account, the brokerage account, just into Nora's name. Nora's 401k, that has to stay with her. You can't give someone else your retirement. So that would stay with Nora. And the home too. So we have the home, which, you know, you could consider putting that into Nora's name as well. However, once you get to that point, right, then you kind of start getting into some estate tax mitigation issues.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, and the big takeaway here, folks, there's two things going on here. So, you know, what we want to do is engage in asset protection, right? But we're also engaging in some tax minimization. And a key thing, this is what I call the marriage penalty in the Massachusetts estate tax. And it sneaks up on people, folks. And so how that works is every individual gets a $2 million estate tax exemption. So we talked about this. If I own $1.9 million in assets upon my death, there's no estate tax because I'm exempt. I'm below that exemption amount, $2 million. Okay. What happens is, though, folks, typically married couples, they're either own all their assets jointly, or upon death of the first spouse, everything goes to the surviving spouse. That first spouse is not using their exemption amount because everything's going to the surviving spouse. Then when the surviving spouse dies, they get their $2 million exemption. There's no way to claw back that first spouse's $2 million exemption. So part of what we're doing here is we want to balance the assets in Nora's and in Amanda's asset portfolio to make sure that it's equalized so that we're making full use, or at least efficient use of both of their estate tax exemptions. And so it's, to Claire's point, it's not just a matter of drawing a line right down the middle of each asset. This is where we want to look at the nature of each asset, right? So to Claire's point, I mean, Nora's 401k is stuck in her name. You can't put that in Amanda's name. So that's kind of on Nora's side of the ledger. But when we're looking at an investment account, right, it's held jointly, right? I'll tell you, if I'm a suing plaintiff and I want to go after Amanda's beauty salon, I'm going to love to get my hands on that investment account, right? So therefore, it's probably going to be advisable, as Claire said, to put that investment account on Nora's side of the ledger, right? So what we're getting at here is part of the upshot of being married is not just the love and happiness you get, but it's you can also use your spouse as an asset protection vehicle. And this is very helpful when, particularly when you have one business owner spouse and the other spouse is kind of like a W-2 worker, right? There's not as much or not, really any liability exposure because of, their day-to-day business, right? So put the at-risk assets in the W-2 worker spouse's name and minimize the extent to which you have vulnerable assets in the business owner's name. So that's how, kind of to Claire's point, to kind of put a bow on the estate planning piece. It's like, especially when we're talking about business owners, estate plan is much more than, kind of just, getting a will, right? You really need to look carefully at kind of the, what kind of trust planning is in order, the succession planning, who's going to run things if you're not able to, tax mitigation. Kind of, it's almost like to some degree, like especially in this asset allocation, it's almost like we're playing a three-dimensional chess game to achieve asset protection in terms of liability protection, but also tax mitigation. Okay, and I think should we just move on to number 3 there, Claire? I think
Yeah, so
that's
let's
enough.
move on
Enough.
there.
That's enough death and taxes for one day, right? Yeah. So, okay.
Yes, enough death and taxes. So yeah, let's move on to fire no wall number 3. So as you recall, we've built our firewall by activating our corporate shield, number 1. Number 2, we've done some estate planning to minimize taxes, to provide some protection for our beneficiaries. And so what else can we do? Is there anything else we can do? Yes. So let's look at that third firewall, judicious asset management. So what does this include? Well, these are steps that people can take really regardless, kind of outside of the legal world, right? What you can do is, sit down with your financial advisor, right? Look at your retirement accounts. Qualified retirement accounts have protection from creditors. So anything that you put into there would be protected from suing customers, patients, clients, what have you. They offer tax deferrals. And there's also many different types of plans. So if you're self-employed or you work for an employer, there's 401ks and IRAs and SEPs and pension plans and simple employee pensions. So there's a lot of opportunity you can do to kind of max out your retirement accounts and keep those shielded from creditors. Insurance, of course, talk to your insurance professionals out there, life insurance, business insurance, umbrella insurance, all different types and flavors of insurance for you to explore. And privacy is huge too, right? So, we're kind of living in a time where everyone puts everything online. And it's not always a good idea to do that. Think about your privacy from, just a personal standpoint. Do you want people knowing that you're away on vacation, your home's empty? No, probably not a good idea. You're posting videos on Instagram of your trip to Paris while your home's sitting empty. You're exposing yourself to potential harms there. So just be judicious in what you share out there.
Yeah, and I would also add, it's on the insurance, huge, right? I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes, look, we talked about business entities and such, but depending on the nature of the business, look, a good solid insurance policy will do the trick. You don't need to go through the expense and the rigmarole of creating a business entity necessarily. So it's something to look at and, ask yourself, kind of, when was the last time you reviewed the details of the policy, right? I mean, is the policy current? I mean, at the end of the day, right, with insurance is, the whole fundamental philosophy is that, you're paying a premium now, right, that you can afford to transfer a risk that you cannot afford later, right? And so at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. I know we have a lot of, or I don't know if it's a lot, but I know we have a few financial professionals, insurance professionals, part of this chamber with great talent. So definitely, speak with them. Low-hanging fruit there, good insurance, and there's like an umbrella insurance policy, maybe disability, right? Remember,
Yes.
what if something happens to you? Going to replace that income. So very, very, very important. And you don't even need a lawyer for that, right? which is always nice.
You don't have to see us for that. Yeah.
And a big thing, folks, too, to kind of really hit, I really want to hit home, I guess, at least on my final point on the privacy piece. And that is a lot of people don't realize that, this kind of goes back to estate planning and probate avoidance. A lot of people don't realize that when your will is probated, like when your estate goes through probate, basically, it's just on full display. Your will becomes a public document. The whole court docket becomes, public. And so oftentimes, especially depending on the nature of the business operations, it's not only advisable to avoid probate from the standpoint of just avoiding the added expenses and delays, but just to kind of keep things private, right? Why put this on public display? My concern, frankly, is that this is nothing new, right? Probate records have always been public, right? But my concern is that we're living in an era where data brokers are out there. You get some data here, you get some data here, and then you put two and two together, and you can start reading the tea leaves, and you start putting like a profile together, especially if you're talking about an estate plan where you're a business owner, you have substantial assets, you're leaving assets to your family. Who knows what could happen, especially as a lot of this data is fed into AI systems and such. So call me paranoid, but it's a real concern.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of wraps up our presentation here on the 3 firewalls. 3 ways that you can protect yourself and your assets as small business owners. And if you folks have any questions, I think we have a few minutes left so we can address those. But of course, you're always welcome to send us an email as well. Our email, give us a call. Our contact information is on the top of that handout.
I
Thank you
don't
for your
have
time.
sorry. I was just going to say, I don't have a question, but for various reasons, I've been going through a lot of this work for, family trusts and end of life stuff. And I cannot agree more as to how important it is to do and what a great relief it is to have it done. It
Yeah.
really, as much as it takes to get over the hump of going to do it sometimes, I feel like once you take that first step and sit down and you're with a professional who knows what they're talking about and doesn't just seem, it doesn't feel as overwhelming to take you step by step. At the end of that process, it is just such a weight lifted off your shoulders and to feel secure. So
Thank
worth
you,
doing.
Jack. Yeah, thank you. No, that's always our favorite thing to hear, when we're done with an engagement, people are coming in and they sign off on their documents and they're like, oh, I'm just so happy that's done. So yeah, exactly. That's, we really want to give people the peace of mind having everything all tied up like that.
Well,
And
I'm
I
gonna
think
ask
that, oh, go, Tim, go right ahead.
I'm gonna ask a bunch of dumb questions. I mean, only because I don't know anything. So I heard you mention like boards and stuff. So do you have to have a board if you're an LLC?
No, you don't have to. No. You could, but nope, you certainly don't have to. No. It's not really, it's typically not called a board, but it's like kind of the equivalent, but
Yeah. I mean, like more than, so you can't be a one person LLC. You got to have other members.
absolutely. And the one thing, and if you are going to have a one person LLC, you definitely want to pay attention to that first firewall we talked about. And the key thing for you, Tim, would be to make sure that you're on, make sure that you're separating, business assets from personal assets, right? Because if there's too much kind of going back and forth and there's not really a clear kind of, there's not really a clear distinction, that's where you could potentially, get in trouble. Yeah. Because it can be kind of tough when you're a single business owner, because you're everything you do, right, is naturally kind of business related, right? So it can be
Right.
it can be kind of tricky, but yeah, always happy to talk with you about that. A good accountant too. It's important to kind of typically a lot of the pitfalls can be picked up on if you have like a regular accountant or bookkeeper checking on things, they should be able to flag problematic areas for you.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Any
Any-
other? Oh. I was going to see if there are any other questions. One of the things that I've spoken to Ben and Claire about in preparation for this is that it's really difficult for folks in general to have these conversations. They're sensitive subjects. There's a lot of family participation and or, I don't want to use the word shame, but like you think you're supposed to be somewhere else in your planning process and you come into a professional and feel like you're kind of like letting it all loose and having to trust. But being able to do all of that means that you can put all of these pieces in place and really protect yourself, your family, and your business. So it has been a pleasure working to put this together. And I'm really happy that we were able to present it today.
Thank you
Likewise.
so
No,
much.
thank you. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Vince. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, everyone. No, it was fun.
Do you have anything you'd like to add, Vince?
No, just thank you so much. I feel smarter. I'm just curious, how are you guys structured? LLC, S Corp, C Corp? Just curious.
So we
Oh, no.
are partnerships. So we ourselves, lawyers are kind of weird, of course, you know that, but it's hard to have, there's a lot of complexities with having an LLC as an attorney. So yeah, we are a partnership.
Well, you said that up front in more ways than one. We thank you for today, and again, we want to give a shout out to Florence Bank for sponsoring this series on Link&Learns. So